Millionaire CEO scoffed. Translate this and my salary is yours. The black maid's reply left him shocked. What would you do if someone offered you a millionaire's salary for just one translation? I'm talking about a real millionaire, not some social media influencer flashing fake money, but a genuine billionaire CEO who controls tech empires across 2 continents. Would you freeze up? Would you walk away? Or would you step up and prove everyone wrong? Have you ever been underestimated because of your job title? Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of successful people? You know that feeling when you're the smartest person in the room, but nobody sees you because of what you're wearing or where you come from. Well, tonight, I'm sharing the story of Damalola, a brilliant woman dismissed as just a maid who shocked the billionaire CEO with 5 simple words that changed everything. But what she did next, that's where this story gets truly incredible. The crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over Lagos' most exclusive dinner party. We're talking about the kind of gathering where a single handshake can move millions of dollars and where the wrong word can destroy careers overnight. The marble floors gleamed under the feet of Nigeria's elite, French investors and international power brokers, all gathered in the sprawling mansion of Alexander Moreau, a French-Nigerian billionaire whose tech empire had just hit the $10 billion mark. Alex Moreau wasn't just rich. He was the kind of wealthy that made other billionaires jealous. His AI-driven language software had revolutionized global communication, and tonight's dinner was about to secure his next massive expansion. The man commanded respect with every breath, intimidated competitors with a single glance, and had never, not once, been challenged by anyone beneath his social status. At least, that's what he thought. Moving silently through the corridors, carrying trays and ensuring every detail was perfect, was Damalola Adeyemi. To everyone in that room, she was invisible, just another black woman in a servant's uniform, there to refill glasses and clear plates. They had no idea they were looking at a linguistic genius who spoke 5 languages fluently and could translate legal documents that would make Harvard law professors sweat. They had no idea that this maid had grown up surrounded by books in Yoruba, French, English, and Spanish, taught by a father who was a respected linguist at the University of Ibadan. They couldn't see past a uniform to recognize the brilliant mind that had been forced into domestic work to support her family after her father's unexpected death. But tonight, all of that was about to change. As the evening progressed, the conversation grew heated. Laurent, a silver-haired French investor known for his condescending attitude toward African markets, was deep in negotiation with Alex. The man was smooth, sophisticated, and absolutely ruthless, the kind of person who would smile while stealing your company from under your nose. Laurent slid a thick document across the mahogany table, his words flowing in rapid, complex French. The language was dense, filled with legal jargon that even native speakers would struggle with. It was a contract that would grant his company exclusive rights to Francophone West Africa, a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Alex, despite his French heritage, found himself struggling with some of the more intricate clauses. The pressure was mounting. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting to see if the great Alexander Moreau would stumble over his own ancestral language. That's when Damalola heard something that made her blood run cold. Hidden within Laurent's elegant phrases was a clause that would essentially rob Alex of his African operations. It was subtle, disguised as a standard agreement, but Damalola caught it immediately. She watched as Alex, focused on impressing his guests, completely missed the trap being set for him. For a moment, she hesitated. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. Why should she care if a billionaire got outsmarted by another billionaire? But then she remembered her father's words. Knowledge is power, and power shared is power multiplied. With her heart pounding, Damalola stepped forward into the circle of light, her voice clear and confident. "Excuse me, Monsieur Laurent. I believe the clause in question would grant your company exclusive rights to not only Côte d'Ivoire, but to all Francophone regions of West Africa." The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. Alex's eyes flashed with a mixture of surprise and irritation as he turned toward her. "And how, pray tell, do you know this?" he demanded, his voice carrying the edge of arrogance that had made him millions of enemies. Without missing a beat, Damalola replied, "I learned French under my father's tutelage, and I have spent my life translating for survival. I reviewed the document while ensuring the kitchen remained immaculate." Laughter erupted around the table. Not the kind of laughter that comes from joy, but the mocking, dismissive laughter of people who couldn't believe a mere maid had just corrected their host. Alex's competitive pride was wounded. Here was this woman, this servant, claiming to understand legal French better than he did. In a moment of pure arrogance mixed with challenge, he reached for the thickest bundle of papers on the table. The latest contract drafted in the most complex legal French imaginable. He slid it toward Damalola with a smirk that could have frozen fire. "Translate this document flawlessly," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "and my salary is yours." The room erupted in laughter again. Alex Moreau's yearly salary was rumored to be in the tens of millions, not including bonuses, stock options, and dividends that push his annual income well into the hundreds of millions. But Damalola didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She simply looked down at the document, then back up at Alex with eyes that held a quiet confidence that made the laughter die in throats around the room. If you ever felt underestimated, hit that like button. This story is for you, because what happened next didn't just shock Alex Moreau. It changed the entire trajectory of two lives forever, and the ripple effects are still being felt today. As Damalola's eyes scanned the first page of the contract, something extraordinary happened. The room's energy shifted. The mocking smiles began to fade as her lips moved silently, processing complex legal terminology with the kind of speed that made seasoned lawyers nervous. But to understand what happened next, you need to know who these two people really were, because nothing about the story is what it appears to be. 3 years earlier, Damalola Adeyemi had been on a completely different path. While her classmates at the University of Lagos were struggling with basic French grammar, she was already fluent in 5 languages and dreaming of joining the United Nations as a professional interpreter. Her father, Professor Adebayo Adeyemi, wasn't just any linguistics professor. He was a man who had created the first comprehensive digital dictionary for endangered Nigerian languages. Language is the DNA of culture. He used to tell her every morning over breakfast in their modest flat in Yaba. When you master language, you don't just learn words, you inherit the soul of the people. Professor Adeyemi's office at the University of Ibadan was legendary. Students would travel from across West Africa just to attend his seminars on comparative linguistics. He had spent decades documenting oral traditions, preserving dying dialects, and building bridges between African and European languages. His work had earned him recognition from UNESCO, and his daughter was his greatest pride. Damalola wasn't just learning from textbooks. She was growing up in a living laboratory of language. By age 16, she could switch between Yoruba, English, French, Spanish, and Arabic mid-sentence, each transition so smooth it sounded like music. Her father had been preparing her for a scholarship to the Sorbonne in Paris, where she would study international diplomacy and linguistics. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in March, everything changed. Professor Adeyemi had been working late in his office, finalizing a research paper on language preservation in post-colonial Africa. The security guard found him the next morning, slumped over his desk, his heart having given out sometime during the night. The doctor said it was a massive cardiac arrest, stress from overwork and years of fighting for funding for his research. The funeral was attended by hundreds of students, colleagues, and government officials. But when the ceremonies ended and condolences stopped coming, Damalola faced a harsh reality. Her father's salary had been their family's only income. Her mother, who had been battling diabetes for years, couldn't work. Her younger brother Theo was only 14 and still in secondary school. The university offered her a small scholarship, but it wasn't enough to cover her studies and support her family. The prestigious programs her father had dreamed of for her became distant mirages. Within 6 months, she had dropped out of university and taken her first job, cleaning offices in a corporate building on Lagos Island. But here's what made Damilola different from every other person who had ever suffered a setback. She refused to let her circumstances define her capabilities. While scrubbing floors at night, she would listen to French news broadcasts on her phone. During lunch breaks, she would practice simultaneous translation by listening to CNN International and rendering it into Yoruba. She checked out advanced linguistics textbooks from a university library, studying by candlelight when power cuts left her neighborhood in darkness. Now, standing in Alexander Moreau's mansion, she wasn't just a maid who spoke French. She was a linguistic genius who had been forced to hide her brilliance behind a uniform. But Alex Moreau had his own secrets. The man sitting at the head of that table, commanding respect from some of the world's most powerful investors, was fighting battles that no amount of money could win. His mother, Adunni Moreau, had been a successful Lagos businesswoman who had fallen in love with a French diplomat in the 1980s. She had moved to Paris, built a life between two worlds, and raised her son to be proud of both his heritages. But when Alex was 12, his mother was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. He spent his teenage years watching a woman who had taught him to speak Yoruba, who had filled their Paris apartment with the smells of jollof rice and the sounds of Fela Kuti, slowly forget who she was. By the time she died, Alex had already begun distancing himself from his Nigerian identity. It was easier to be just French in the tech circles of Paris and Silicon Valley. Speaking Yoruba reminded him of loss. Eating Nigerian food brought back memories of his mother's confused face when she could no longer remember the recipes she had once cooked from memory. He built his language AI company not out of love for communication, but out of a desperate need to prove that he could succeed without relying on any cultural advantages. Every algorithm he created was designed to be culturally neutral, stripped of the very identity markers that his mother had died trying to preserve. Success came quickly. His software could translate between 200 languages with 99.7% accuracy. Tech giants fought bidding wars for his patents. But with each milestone, Alex felt more disconnected from the world around him. The mansion in Lagos was purchased not as a homecoming, but as a business investment. He hired local staff not to connect with his roots, but because they were efficient and cost-effective. When he looked at employees like Damilola, he saw labor, not people. He had no idea that the woman refilling his wine glass held the same passion for languages that had once driven his mother to teach him lullabies in 3 different tongues. As these two forces, hidden brilliance and buried identity, prepared to collide over a legal document, neither could have predicted that this moment would force them both to confront the parts of themselves they had spent years trying to suppress. The contract lay between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. But before we get to what happened next, you need to understand the stakes of this particular evening, because this wasn't just any dinner party. Alex had spent 3 months planning this gathering. Every detail had been calculated perfection. The guest list included the CEOs of 2 major European tech companies, the Deputy Minister of Science and Technology, and 5 of the most influential venture capitalists in Africa. The purpose? To secure a $500 million funding round that would make his company the dominant force in AI-powered language translation across 3 continents. Laurent Dubois wasn't just any investor. He was a managing partner of Marseille Capital, a firm that controlled over $12 billion in assets. His decision tonight could either catapult Alex's company into the global stratosphere or leave it struggling to compete with Silicon Valley giants. The man held Alex's future in his manicured hands. But Laurent had a reputation. In business circles, he was known for a colonial approach to African investments, a strategy that involved acquiring local companies at bargain prices, stripping them of their cultural identity, and rebranding them for European markets. He had done it in Morocco, Senegal, and Ghana. Tonight, he was planning to do it to Alex. "You see, Alexander," Laurent said, swirling his wine glass as he spoke, "the African market has tremendous potential, but it lacks the sophistication for complex technological solutions. What you need is European management, European standards, and European oversight. Dr. Amara Okafor, the deputy minister, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had a PhD in computer science from MIT and had returned to Nigeria specifically to prevent foreign companies from exploiting local talent. But in rooms like this, her credentials seemed to disappear behind the weight of Laurent's condescension. The beauty of your language software, Laurent continued, is that we can simplify it for the African market, remove the complex features, create a more basic version. Africans don't need the same level of sophistication as European users. Alex nodded along, not because he agreed, but because he needed Laurent's money. Each nod felt like a betrayal of his mother's memory, but business was business. From her position near the kitchen door, Damilolo watched this exchange with growing frustration. She had seen this performance before. Wealthy foreigners speaking about Africa as if it were a child that needed guidance. She had heard Laurent's type dismiss African intelligence while sitting in mansions built by African hands, eating food prepared by African minds. But what really caught her attention was the document Laurent kept referencing. Each time he mentioned a clause, he would glance at the contract with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Damilola had grown up reading her father's research contracts, and she recognized the signs of deceptive language from across the room. The turning point came when Laurent made a comment that changed everything. "The best part about African partnerships," he said, leaning back in his chair, "is that locals are often too grateful for the opportunity to read the fine print carefully. They focus on the immediate benefits and miss the long-term implications." The room fell silent. Even the other European investors looked uncomfortable. Dr. Okafor set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "Mr. Du Bois, I think you may have misunderstood the nature of this partnership." Laurent's smile widened. "Oh, I understand perfectly. African businesses need European expertise to reach their full potential. It's not personal. It's simply economic reality." That's when Damilola noticed something that made her blood freeze. Laurent's contract wasn't just about partnership. It was about acquisition. Hidden within the legal jargon was a clause that would gradually transfer ownership of Alex's company to Marseille Capital over a period of 5 years. By the end of the contract, Alex would be an employee of his own company. And Alex, focused on impressing his guests and securing the funding, was about to sign away everything his mother had inspired him to build. Damilola faced a choice. She could stay silent, let the wealthy men play their games, and continue her invisible existence. Or she could risk everything to save a man who had never seen her as more than hired help. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Knowledge unused is wisdom wasted." She stepped forward. "Excuse me, Monsieur Laurent," she said, her voice cutting through the conversation like a blade. "I believe the clause in question would grant your company exclusive rights to not only Côte d'Ivoire, but to all Francophone regions of West Africa." The wine glasses stopped moving. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of Lagos traffic. Laurent's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, irritation, and then calculated amusement. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" "I am Damilola Adeyemi," she replied, standing straighter. "And I believe you are misrepresenting the terms of your proposal." The laughter started small, a chuckle from one of the European investors, then a snicker from a local businessman who was desperate to fit in. Soon, the entire room was filled with the sound of people who couldn't believe a domestic worker had just corrected one of Europe's most powerful financiers. Alex's face flushed red. His reputation was being challenged by his own employee, in front of the most important investors of his career. "And how?" he demanded, his voice tight with embarrassment and anger. "Do you know this?" Damilola's response was calm, confident, and completely unexpected. "I learned French under my father's tutelage, and I have spent my life translating for survival. I reviewed the document while ensuring the kitchen remained immaculate." The laughter doubled. Laurent actually slapped his knee. "This is rich." The help thinks she understands international business law. Alex's competitive pride, already wounded by Lauren's condescension, was now being shredded by his own staff. In a moment of pure arrogance designed to reassert his dominance, he grabbed the thickest document on the table, a 47-page contract drafted by one of Paris's most prestigious law firms. He slammed it down in front of Damalola. "Translate this document flawlessly, and my salary is yours." The room erupted in laughter again, but this time it felt different, meaner, more desperate. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated like this? Because what happened next didn't just silence the laughter. It changed the entire power dynamic in that room forever. Because what happened next didn't just silence the laughter. It changed the entire power dynamic in that room forever. Damalola looked down at the 47-page contract, her expression unchanged. While the room continued its chorus of amusement, she calmly picked up the document and began to read. Not scan read. Her eyes moved across each line with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. "This is a joint venture agreement between Morrow Technologies and Marseille Capital," she began, her voice clear and measured. "Dated the 15th of November, 2023. The parties hereby agree to the following terms and conditions." The laughter began to fade. This wasn't broken French or hesitant pronunciation. This was perfect, fluid translation delivered with the confidence of someone who had spent years mastering the language. Article 3. Section B stipulates that all intellectual property developed during the partnership shall be jointly owned, with Marseille Capital retaining the right to license said property to third parties without prior consent from Morrow Technologies. Lauren's smile wavered. That clause was buried on page 23, written in the kind of legal language designed to be overlooked. But Damalola wasn't finished. However, Article 7, Section D, which appears on page 31, contradicts this provision by stating that licensing decisions require unanimous agreement from both parties. This creates a legal conflict that would likely result in costly litigation. The room went completely quiet. Even the servers stopped moving. Alex leaned forward, his earlier embarrassment replaced by intense focus. "Continue." Article 12 contains what appears to be a termination clause, but the French text uses the phrase résiliation automatique, which doesn't translate to standard termination. It actually means automatic dissolution, which would trigger if Morrow Technologies fails to meet quarterly targets that are, according to Article 15, to be determined solely by Marseille Capital. Lauren's wine glass slipped from his fingers, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. "But here's the most interesting part," Damalola continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Article 23, Section F, written in archaic legal French that most modern translators would miss, contains a clause that transfers all company assets to Marseille Capital in the event of dissolution. Essentially, Mr. Moreau, this contract would give Mr. Du Bois the legal right to seize your company whenever he chooses, simply by setting impossible targets. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Okafor was the first to speak. "Is this true, Mr. Du Bois?" Lauren's face had gone pale. "The contract is complex. These are standard industry provisions." "Standard?" Damalola interrupted, her voice cutting through his explanation. "The asset transfer clause is written in legal French from the 1920s. It's archaic terminology that was specifically chosen because most modern translators wouldn't recognize it. This isn't a partnership agreement. It's a sophisticated acquisition trap." She set the contract down on the table with deliberate precision. "Your yearly salary, Mr. Moreau, according to your last publicly filed tax statement, is approximately $47 million. I have just saved you considerably more than that." The room exploded into whispered conversations. Investors pulled out their phones, frantically texting their legal teams. The deputy minister was furiously taking notes. Alex stared at Damalola as if seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the invisible domestic worker he had dismissed for 3 years. This was someone who had just demonstrated a level of legal and linguistic expertise that most of his highly paid consultants couldn't match. Laurent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "This is preposterous. You're taking the word of a what?" Dr. Okafor asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Laurent's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He couldn't finish the sentence without revealing exactly what he thought of African intelligence. "A brilliant linguist," Alex said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what she is." The power shift in the room was immediate and absolute. Laurent, who had entered as a dominant force, now looked like a man whose carefully constructed facade had just crumbled. The other investors, who had been hanging on his every word, now regarded him with suspicion and disgust. But perhaps the most dramatic transformation was in Alex himself. The man who had spent years distancing himself from his African identity was now face-to-face with a level of intellectual sophistication that shattered every stereotype he had unconsciously accepted. Damilola stood quietly in the center of the room, her hands folded in front of her, watching as the implications of her words rippled through the gathering. She had not just translated a document. She had exposed conspiracy, saved a company, and revealed the true nature of everyone present. Laurent gathered his papers with shaking hands. "This meeting is over." "Yes," Alex said, his voice growing stronger. "I believe it is." As Laurent and his entourage left the mansion, their footsteps echoing through the corridors, the remaining guests looked at Damilola with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. They had just witnessed a masterclass in linguistic expertise delivered by someone they had dismissed as invisible. But the real shock was yet to come. The next morning, as Lagos awakened to its usual symphony of car horns and street vendors, Alex sat in his private study staring at the same contract that had nearly destroyed his empire. The mahogany shelves around him held first editions of literary classics in 7 languages, but none of those books had prepared him for what he had witnessed the night before. Damilola arrived for work at her usual time, expecting to clean up the aftermath of the dinner party. Instead, she found Alex waiting for her in the study, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled, a man who had clearly spent the night wrestling with his own assumptions. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "Please." She remained standing. "Mr. Moreau, I hope my intervention last night didn't cause you embarrassment. I simply couldn't." "You saved my company," he interrupted. "Laurent's contract would have stripped me of everything I built. My legal team had reviewed those documents 3 times and missed what you caught in 15 minutes. The weight of his words settled between them. For the first time in 3 years, Alex was seeing her not as an employee, but as an equal. "I need someone who comprehends not just language, but its soul," he continued, his voice carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability. "I'm embarking on a business expansion to Paris, a city that values both precision and passion. I want you to accompany me as my personal translator and cultural consultant." Damilola's heart stopped. "Sir, I'm not qualified for..." "You're the most qualified person I've ever met," he said firmly. "Your compensation would be 10 times your current salary, plus housing expenses, and a contract that protects you from the kind of exploitation Laurent attempted on me." The offer hung in the air like a bridge between 2 worlds. For Damilola, it represented everything she had dreamed of since her father's death. A chance to use her skills on the international stage, to honor his memory through meaningful work. But it also meant leaving her mother and brother, stepping into a world where she would be the only person who looked like her, and trusted a man who had barely acknowledged her existence until 12 hours ago. "I need time to consider," she said carefully. "Take all the time you need," Alex replied. "But I leave for Paris in 72 hours. The invitation stands until then." 2 days later, Damilola stood in the departure lounge at Murtala Muhammad International Airport, her father's worn leather briefcase in her hands and her mother's prayers echoing in her ears. She had made her choice. Paris unfolded before her like a city of contradictions. The elegant boulevards and historic architecture were everything she had imagined, but the reality of navigating French high society as a black woman from Nigeria proved more challenging than any legal document. At business dinners and Michelin-starred restaurants, she felt the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations. Who is she? What is her role exactly? Is she really his translator or something else? But Damilola had learned to transform skepticism into advantage. When German investors questioned her qualifications, she responded in fluent German. When Italian partners tried to exclude her from technical discussions, she interjected with insights that revealed their own limitations. Alex watched this transformation with growing admiration. The woman who had once moved invisibly through his mansion now commanded respect in boardrooms across Europe. She didn't just translate words. She interpreted cultural nuances, identified hidden agendas, and provided strategic insights that consistently placed Alex at an advantage. Their professional relationship began to shift into something deeper during their third week in Paris. They were staying at the George V Hotel, in adjoining suites that overlooked the Champs-Élysées. After a particularly grueling day of negotiations with Swiss banking executives, Alex found Damilola on the shared balcony, her silhouette framed against the city lights. "You're troubled?" she observed without turning around. "How do you know?" "You've been switching between French and English all evening. You only do that when you're conflicted about something." Alex joined her at the railing, their shoulders almost touching. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" "Every day," she replied honestly. "But I've learned that authenticity isn't about where you are. It's about who you choose to be in that place." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the late-night traffic flow like ribbons of light through the city below. When Alex finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My mother used to tell me stories about Lagos when I was young. She described the markets, the music, the way people laugh with their entire bodies. But after she died, I convinced myself that those stories were just nostalgia, that the real world was here, in boardrooms and bank accounts. And now I realize I've been living half a life." Damilola turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "It's never too late to reclaim the parts of yourself you've lost." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Alex reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, and she didn't pull away. "Dammy," he whispered, using the shortened version of her name for the first time. "Yes, I'm falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Damilola searched his eyes, looking for sincerity she had learned to recognize in his voice. "I've been waiting for you to realize that," she said softly. Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But as her hands found their way to his chest and his arms encircled her waist, the restraint they had maintained for weeks dissolved into something deeper. Alex lifted her easily, carrying her from the balcony into his suite. The city lights cast a warm glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows as he set her down beside the bed, his hands trembling slightly as they found the zipper of her dress. "Are you sure?" he asked, his forehead resting against hers. Her answer came in the form of a kiss that left no room for doubt. As her dress fell away, his shirt followed, their movements synchronized like a dance they had both been practicing in secret. They explored each other with the careful reverence of archaeologists uncovering precious artifacts. Alex's lips traced the curve of her neck, drawing soft sighs that made him feel more powerful than any business victory. Damilola's fingers mapped the contours of his chest, her touch erasing years of loneliness with each caress. When they finally joined together, it was with the intensity of two people who had found something they hadn't realized they were searching for. The sounds of Paris faded into background noise as they lost themselves in each other, their bodies writing a language that needed no translation. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the aftermath of their passion, Alex traced lazy patterns on Damilola's bare shoulder. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," she replied, her head resting on his chest. "We figure out how to build something real." Outside their window, Paris continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, but inside that room, two souls had found their way home. Outside their window, Paris continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, but inside that room, two souls had found their way home. For 3 weeks, their relationship blossomed like a secret garden. Alex began incorporating Yoruba phrases into his presentations, crediting Damilola as his cultural strategy consultant rather than just his translator. She, in turn, helped him reconnect with parts of his identity he had buried for years. But their happiness was being watched. Chinua Okafor had been Alex's executive assistant for 5 years, managing his schedule, screening his calls, and harboring feelings for him that went far beyond professional admiration. She had assumed that her loyalty, her MBA from London Business School, and her patient devotion would eventually earn her the position she truly wanted. At Alex's side as his equal, Damilola's presence had shattered that fantasy. "You're making a mistake," Chinua told Alex one morning as they prepared for the evening's gala, a charity fundraiser that would host over 300 of Europe's most influential business leaders. "People are talking. They're saying you're compromising your professional judgment." Alex was adjusting his bow tie in the mirror. "What people?" "The Deutsche Bank representatives, the Italian investors. They're questioning whether you can maintain objectivity when your personal life becomes so entangled with your business decisions." "My personal life is none of their concern, isn't it?" Chinua moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Alex, I've been protecting your reputation for years. But this situation with Damilola, it's different. People see her as your weakness, not your strength." The seeds of doubt were planted with surgical precision. Chinua had spent weeks studying Alex's insecurities, understanding exactly which fears to exploit. That evening, the Palette of Tokyo had been transformed into a glittering showcase of European wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors as guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos discussed billion-dollar deals over champagne and caviar. Damilola wore a stunning emerald dress that Alex had chosen for her, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had learned to belong in any room. She was deep in conversation with the head of the European Development Bank when she noticed Alex across the room, surrounded by a group of Swiss investors. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see Alex's body language, tense, defensive, eager to please. When one of the men gestured in her direction, she knew they were discussing her. "Your African companion," she heard one of them say as she approached. "She's quite impressive, but surely this is a temporary arrangement?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Alex glanced at Damilola, their eyes meeting across the small circle of men. In that moment, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Shame. He was ashamed of her presence, ashamed of their relationship, ashamed of what these men might think. "Damilola is a highly skilled professional," Alex replied carefully. "She's been invaluable during this expansion phase." "Of course," the Swiss banker continued, "but you understand our concerns about long-term stability. Temporary consultants, no matter how talented, can become complications." Alex's next words would replay in Damilola's mind for years to come. "You're absolutely right," he said, his voice carrying the cold professionalism that had made him millions. "This is a temporary arrangement. Once the European expansion is complete, she'll return to her previous position." The conversation continued, but Damilola heard nothing beyond the sound of her own heartbeat. Previous position, temporary arrangement. The words echoed like gunshots in her mind. She excused herself from the group and walked directly to Alex, interrupting his conversation with the calm authority of someone who had reached her breaking point. "Mr. Moreau," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "May I have a word?" The Swiss investors exchanged glances, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Alex followed her to a quiet corner of the ballroom, his face already showing the regret of someone who realized he had made a terrible mistake. "Am I merely a convenience to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of thunder. "A temporary solution to a professional problem?" Dammy, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she interrupted. I understand that 3 weeks ago, you told me you were falling in love with me. I understand that I trusted you with my heart, my body, my future. And I understand that you just reduced me to a temporary consultant who will be discarded when she's no longer useful. Alex's face crumpled. That's not what I meant. They were pressuring me, questioning my judgment. I panicked. You panicked. Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests. You panicked. So you decided to publicly humiliate the woman you claimed to love? I was trying to protect you. By denying our relationship? By treating me like a business transaction? Tears she had been holding back began to fall. Alex, I gave up everything for you. I left my family, my country, my life. And you just told a room full of strangers that I was temporary. The pain in her voice cut through him like a physical blow. Dammy, please. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain, she said, removing the emerald necklace he had given her and placing on a nearby table. I understand my position perfectly now. Have you ever had to choose between love and self-respect? Share your story below, because what Damilola did next would teach both of them that some betrayals cannot be forgiven with explanations. Because what Damilola did next would teach both of them that some betrayals cannot be forgiven with explanations. She walked away, not dramatically, not with a scene that would give the Swiss investors more gossip to share over their champagne. She simply collected her coat, informed the hotel concierge that she would be checking out immediately, and took the first available flight back to Lagos. Alex didn't follow her to the airport. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't send flowers with apologetic notes, because somewhere in the depths of his shame, he understood that this wasn't the kind of wound that could be healed with grand gestures or expensive gifts. Back in Lagos, Damilola threw herself into rebuilding the life she had temporarily abandoned. She moved back into her family's modest flat in Yaba, where her mother's gentle questions about Paris were met with carefully constructed half-truths. She returned to domestic work, but this time with a different agency that specialized in placing educated women in professional households. But her real healing began at the Adebayo Adeyemi Cultural Center. 6 months after her return, Damilola had transformed her father's memory into something tangible. Using her savings from the Paris job, she had rented a small building in Ikeja and created a space where young people could learn languages, explore their cultural heritage, and develop the kind of confidence that comes from understanding your own worth. Every evening, the center buzzed with activity. Teenagers practiced French conversation while their younger siblings learned to read Yoruba script. University students preparing for international scholarships received free tutoring in German and Spanish. Elderly community members shared oral histories that Damilola carefully transcribed and translated. Language is a bridge between who you are and who you can become, she would tell her students, echoing her father's words but adding her own hard-earned wisdom. The center's reputation grew quickly. Within a year, it had attracted attention from UNESCO, the French Cultural Institute, and several international development organizations. But the recognition that mattered most to Damilola came from seeing her students succeed, watching shy teenagers transform into confident speakers, witnessing young adults secure scholarships to European universities, observing children discover pride in their heritage. It was during the center's second annual cultural festival that fate decided to intervene. The event had grown beyond Damilola's wildest expectations. The courtyard was filled with colorful tents showcasing everything from traditional Yoruba poetry to contemporary Afrobeat performances. Local dignitaries, international visitors, and hundreds of community members had gathered to celebrate the richness of Nigerian culture. Damilola stood on a small stage, wearing a flowing Ankara dress that her mother had sewn specifically for the occasion. She was preparing to recite a poem she had written about her father's legacy when she noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of the crowd. Alex Moreau looked different. Gone was the perfectly tailored European businessman. Instead, he wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. But the most striking change was in his eyes. They held the vulnerability of someone who had finally stopped running from himself. Damilola's voice never wavered as she began her recitation. My father taught me that words are seeds, planted in the soil of understanding, watered by the tears of those who dare to speak truth, and harvested by generations who refuse to be silenced. The crowd was mesmerized, but Damilola's eyes kept returning to Alex. What was he doing here? How had he found her? He showed me that translation is not about converting words, but about building bridges between hearts. Not about changing languages, but about preserving the soul that language carries. As she reached the poem's conclusion, her voice grew stronger, more defiant. So, I will not be temporary. I will not be convenient. I will not be discarded when my purpose is served. I am the daughter of a linguist, the keeper of stories, the bridge between worlds. I am permanent. The applause was thunderous, but Damilola barely heard it. She was watching Alex push through the crowd, his face streaked with tears. When he reached the stage, he didn't climb up to join her. Instead, he knelt on the ground in front of hundreds of witnesses, his voice carrying across the courtyard without amplification. Damilola Adeyemi, he said, his words heavy with emotion. I came here to apologize, but I realize that's not enough. I came to ask for your forgiveness, but I don't deserve it. I came to tell you that I love you, but love without respect is meaningless. The crowd had fallen silent, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. You were never temporary, Alex continued. You were never convenient. You were the most permanent thing in my life, and I was too afraid to admit it. I reduced you to a business transaction because I was terrified of what you represented, the possibility of being whole. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder of legal documents. I've spent the last year creating something I should have built from the beginning, the African Language Preservation Initiative, a foundation dedicated to documenting, protecting, and promoting indigenous languages across the continent. I want you to run it, not as my employee, not as my consultant, but as my partner, my equal. Damilola descended from the stage, her heart pounding. Alex, I'm not finished, he said, still kneeling. I've also established a scholarship fund in your father's name. Every year, it will send 50 young African linguists to study at universities around the world, with the condition that they return to strengthen their communities. The crowd began to murmur, understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing. And finally, Alex said, his voice breaking, I've learned to speak Yoruba. Not perfectly, not fluently, but enough to say this. Emo knife ri, Damilola. Emo fe ladi kyo ido mi pelatire. I love you, Damilola. I want to build my life with yours. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Damilola's eyes were fixed on Alex. She saw the man who had grown beyond his fears, who had chosen vulnerability over pride, who had learned that true partnership requires genuine equality. Stand up, Alex, she said softly. He rose to his feet, hope and terror warring in his expression. You're right, she said. Love without respect is meaningless, but respect without action is just pretty words. She took the folder from his hands, scanning the legal documents that would make her the director of a multi-million-dollar foundation. These documents, she said, they make us partners? Equal partners, he confirmed. In business and in life, if you'll have me. Damilola smiled, the first genuine smile she had worn in months. Then let's build something extraordinary. Their kiss was witnessed by hundreds of people, but it felt as intimate as if they were alone in the world. When they finally separated, the crowd's cheers could be heard 3 blocks away. Later, as the festival continued around them, Alex and Damilola sat together on a bench overlooking the courtyard where children played games in 4 different languages. We can't go back, she said quietly. I wouldn't want to, he replied. What we had before was unequal. What we have now is partnership. The transformation was complete. The billionaire who had once dismissed her as invisible now saw her as irreplaceable. The maid who had once felt temporary now stood as a leader in her own right. Their love story becomes something more, a testament to the power of growth, the importance of respect, and the possibility of second chances earned through genuine change. Their love story becomes something more, a testament to the power of growth, the importance of respect, and the possibility of second chances earned through genuine change. But this story isn't just about Alex and Damilola. It's about every person who has ever been underestimated, every dreamer who has been told they don't belong, and every individual who has the courage to demand the respect they deserve. The first lesson is perhaps the most crucial. Never judge someone's potential by their current circumstances. When Alex looked at Damilola, he saw a uniform, not a mind. He saw a job title, not a genius. How many times do we make the same mistake? How many brilliant people do we dismiss because they don't fit our narrow definition of success? Damilola's father had taught her that knowledge was the one thing that could never be taken away. While others saw her scrubbing floors, she was building an empire of understanding in her mind. Her circumstances were temporary, but her intelligence was permanent. This teaches us that education and self-development are the ultimate equalizers. No one can strip you of what you've learned, and no barrier can stop a mind determined to grow. The second lesson cuts deeper. True power comes from character, not wealth. Alex had millions, but Damilola had something more valuable: integrity. When she could have stayed silent and watched him make a costly mistake, she chose to speak up. When she could have accepted his betrayal for the sake of financial security, she chose to walk away. Real power isn't about what you can buy. It's about who you choose to be when no one is watching. Perhaps the most important lesson is this: love without respect is not love at all. Alex's feelings for Damilola were genuine, but his willingness to diminish her publicly revealed that his love was conditional. True love elevates the other person, celebrates their achievements, and stands proudly beside them regardless of what others might think. If someone claims to love you but treats you as less than equal, that's not love, that's possession. The fourth lesson speaks to everyone who has ever felt ashamed of their background. Your heritage is your strength, not your limitation. Alex spent years running from his Nigerian roots, believing that success required cultural assimilation. Damilola, conversely, drew power from her father's legacy and her community's wisdom. She understood that authenticity doesn't come from changing who you are, but from fully embracing who you've always been. The final lesson is perhaps the most hopeful. Real transformation requires vulnerability and growth. Alex's change wasn't instant. It took a year of reflection, action, and genuine commitment to earning back Damilola's respect. He didn't just apologize. He restructured his entire approach to life and business. This teaches us that meaningful change is possible, but it requires more than words. It demands consistent action and the courage to become someone better. This story began with a translation, but it became something far more profound. It became a demonstration that one moment of courage can change everything. When Damilola stepped forward in that dining room, she wasn't just correcting a legal document. She was refusing to be invisible. That single act of bravery created ripples that transformed 2 lives and established a foundation that will impact thousands more. The real magic happened when both characters learned to see beyond surface appearances. Alex discovered that brilliance comes in many forms, and Damilola learned that even the most powerful people can grow when challenged with love and truth. Today, the African Language Preservation Initiative has documented over 200 endangered languages and provided scholarships to more than 500 young linguists. But more importantly, it has created a model for how respect, equality, and genuine partnership can build something extraordinary. Your circumstances don't define your destiny. Your current job doesn't determine your worth. Your background doesn't limit your future. And your voice, when used with courage and conviction, has the power to change everything. The question isn't whether you're smart enough, qualified enough, or good enough. The question is whether you're brave enough to step forward when it matters most. If this story inspired you, subscribe for more tales of transformation and hit that notification bell. Because everyone deserves to know that their worth isn't determined by what others see, but by what they choose to do with the gifts they've been given.